The evening news showed a single mother standing in the rain while strangers carried her life onto a wet sidewalk. Her little boy reached into a puddle, picked up a tiny wooden house keychain, and whispered, "Home is where we keep each other." The eviction notice slipped from a cardboard box, revealing the logo of Whitmore Living Communities. Hundreds of miles away, billionaire Ryan Whitmore froze in an airport lounge staring at the television. His face turned pale as he quietly said, "That apartment belongs to my company." What he uncovered over the following weeks would change far more than one family's future. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. Leave it in the comments below. And if stories about courage, kindness, and second chances speak to your heart, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next journey. At 4:30 every morning, long before Cleveland's streets began to fill with traffic, Debra Nelson's alarm chimed with the same gentle piano melody. She never hit the snooze button. Every extra minute mattered when life was measured in bus schedules, work shifts, and the small promises she made to a 9-year-old boy who believed his mother could solve any problem. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of an aging refrigerator. It wasn't much a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of Maple Terrace Apartments, but Debra had spent 4 years turning it into something warmer than the peeling paint and worn carpet suggested. A faded blue blanket covered the old sofa. Small potted herbs lined the kitchen window. Family photographs carefully placed in inexpensive wooden frames made the narrow hallway feel like a gallery of hope instead of hardship. She moved through this kitchen with practiced efficiency, scrambling eggs, while oatmeal simmered on the stove. Before leaving for work every morning, she always packed Caleb's lunch herself. Peanut butter sandwiches on Mondays, turkey on Wednesdays when it was on sale. Fridays were special if she had enough extra money to include homemade chocolate chip cookies from the bakery where she worked. At exactly 5:05, tiny footsteps echoed down the hallway. "Morning, Mom." Debra smiled before she even turned around. "Morning, sleepyhead." Caleb shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, his curly hair sticking up in every direction. He wore oversized pajama pants decorated with little rockets that he had long since outgrown, but refused to throw away. "Did you sleep okay?" He nodded and climbed onto a chair. "I dreamed we built the biggest tree house ever." Debra laughed softly. "Well, that's a pretty good dream." "So, when I grow up?" She looked at him. "Yendisat, I'm going to build houses that nobody ever has to leave." The words caught her off guard for just a second. "That's a wonderful idea." Caleb reached toward the kitchen counter, where their keys rested on a small ceramic dish. Attached to Debra's keyring hung a tiny wooden house, hand-carved and painted with uneven blue windows. He touched it gently with one finger. "Don't forget." "I never do." It had become their morning ritual. When Caleb was 8, his elementary school held a craft day, while other children painted toy cars or animals. Caleb carved a crooked little house from a block of soft wood under his teacher's supervision. On the back, in shaky letters, he had written one sentence: "Home is where we keep each other." He had given it to his mother with such pride that Debra carried it everywhere. The paint had begun to chip around the edges, but she never considered replacing it. To her, it was worth more than anything she owned. By 5:45, Debra was waiting for the city bus carrying a thermos of coffee and a canvas lunch bag. The autumn air felt sharp against her face. Across town, Harper's Corner Bakery was already alive with warm lights and the comforting smell of fresh bread. Debra had worked there for nearly 7 years. She wasn't the owner. She wasn't even the highest-paid employee. But everyone depended on her. She knew which regular customer wanted extra cinnamon, which elderly man needed his coffee cooled before serving, and which college students always split one muffin because money was tight. "Morning, Deb," called Olivia, one of the younger cashiers. "You got here before all of us again." Debra smiled. "Someone has to unlock the place." By 6 o'clock, customers streamed through the doors. Despite aching feet and constant movement, Debra greeted every person with the same patient kindness. She remembered names. She asked about sick parents. She congratulated customers on birthdays. She never rushed elderly visitors counting coins. To many people, she was simply the woman behind the bakery counter. Few realized she quietly made their mornings brighter. Near the end of her shift, Olivia approached nervously. "My son's daycare just called. He's got a fever." Debra didn't hesitate. "Go." "But we're short today." "I'll cover." "You've already worked 10 days straight." Debra simply smiled. "Kids come first." Olivia hugged her before rushing out. Debra stayed another 3 hours without complaint. When she finally clocked out, exhaustion settled into every muscle, yet she still stopped at a grocery store to compare prices on vegetables before taking the bus home. Every dollar had a purpose. Every purchase required calculation. Back at Maple Terrace, the elevator was broken again. She climbed 3 flights carrying reusable grocery bags. Halfway up, she heard a familiar voice. "Miss Nelson?" Harold Jenkins, the 67-year-old widower from the 2nd floor, struggled with 2 heavy bags of laundry. "Let me help." "You've already worked all day." "So have you." She smiled and lifted one bag before he could protest. Harold shook his head. "I don't know how you always find the energy." "You'd do the same for me." He chuckled. "I wish more people believed that." After helping him upstairs, Debra unlocked her apartment. Caleb was already inside finishing homework at the tiny dining table. "Guess what?" he said excitedly. "I got an A on my science quiz." "I knew you would." He proudly showed her the paper before asking the question he asked nearly every afternoon. "Can we eat together tonight?" "No overtime," she promised. "Dinner together." His grin made the entire day worthwhile. They cooked spaghetti, using a recipe Debra had learned from her grandmother. Nothing fancy, just tomato sauce, garlic, and a little basil from the herbs growing on the windowsill. While washing dishes afterward, Debra checked her online banking app. The monthly rent payment had cleared 4 days earlier, just as it always did. She felt relieved. 1 more month secured, or so she believed. A knock interrupted the peaceful evening. Outside stood a young courier holding a white envelope. "And such." "Delivery for Miss Nelson." "Thank you." She closed the door and opened it casually at the kitchen table. Inside was a neatly printed notice. "Account verification required. Please contact the property management office immediately regarding your residency status. Failure to respond may affect your tenancy." Debra frowned. "That's strange." Caleb looked up. "What's wrong?" "Oh, probably just paperwork." "You paid the rent." "I know." She folded the letter carefully. "These companies make mistakes sometimes." She tucked the notice into a kitchen drawer beside warranties, school papers, and utility bills. Tomorrow, she told herself. She would make 1 phone call, clear up the misunderstanding, and laugh about it later. Neither she nor Caleb noticed the tiny wooden house keychain swaying gently beneath her apartment keys as a cool evening breeze drifted through the open kitchen window. It was the last peaceful night they would spend believing that every honest payment was enough to protect a place they called home. The next morning, Debra called the property management office during her first break at exactly 9:17 a.m. A cheerful automated voice answered before she could speak. "Thank you for calling Evergreen Residential Services. Your call is important to us." She waited. Soft piano music filled the silence. After 8 minutes, the music stopped. "We are currently experiencing higher than normal call volume. Please continue to hold." She glanced toward the bakery ovens. Customers were already lining up. Another 5 minutes passed. The call disconnected. Debra stared at her phone for a moment before slipping it back into her apron pocket. "It can wait until lunch," she whispered. She wanted to believe that. At noon, she tried again. 23 minutes later, another disconnection. By the time she finished her shift, she had called 4 times. No human voice had answered once. That evening, she decided to visit the leasing office in person after picking Caleb up from school. The office sat beside the apartment entrance, decorated with fresh flowers and polished glass doors that seemed strangely out of place compared to the aging buildings behind them. A receptionist looked up briefly. "Can I help you?" "I received a verification notice yesterday." Debra placed the envelope gently on the counter. "I think there's been some mistake." The woman typed a few words into her computer. Her smile disappeared. "It says someone will contact you." "When?" "I'm not sure." "Could someone simply look at my payment history?" "I'm not authorized." "Is a manager available?" "She's in meetings all afternoon." Debra nodded politely. "I understand." She left without raising her voice. Outside, Caleb squeezed her hand. "Everything okay?" She smiled. "Just grown-up paperwork." He accepted the answer because he trusted her. Children often believe calm voices more than frightening truths. The following afternoon, Mason Rivera unlocked the maintenance workshop before sunrise. He had worked at Maple Terrace for nearly 15 years. He knew every leaking pipe, every unreliable elevator, every family that baked cookies during Christmas, and every child who rode bicycles in the parking lot. He also knew the Nelson family. Whenever something broke in Debra's apartment, she apologized before asking for help. Whenever he repaired something, she insisted on sending him home with fresh bread from the bakery. Good people, he often thought. The computer beside his workbench displayed maintenance requests alongside tenant information. A flashing notification caught his attention. Unit 3B, resident status vacant. Mason frowned. Vacant? He knew that wasn't possible. He had replaced Debra's kitchen faucet only 3 weeks earlier. He clicked deeper into the file. Payment records, maintenance logs, occupancy reports. Nothing matched. Rent payments continued every month. Utility usage was normal. School emergency contact listed the apartment. Everything suggested an occupied home. Yet the system had classified the unit as abandoned. His stomach tightened. He printed the page and walked directly to the regional office upstairs. Victoria Barnes barely looked away from her laptop. "What is it, Mason?" "I think there's a mistake." She accepted the paper with obvious impatience. "Apartment 3B. The system says vacant." "It isn't. The tenant still lives there." Victoria skimmed the document for only a few seconds. "The database has already processed it." "But the records don't make sense." "The audit team handled it." "I've been inside that apartment." "Then someone else entered incorrect information." Mason remained standing. "Shouldn't we fix it before?" Victoria interrupted. "The system has already generated the next workflow." He hesitated. "What workflow?" She closed the file. "You don't need to concern yourself with administrative decisions. Mistakes can hurt people." Her expression hardened. "Your responsibility is maintenance. Mine is operations." The conversation was over. Mason walked away, carrying an uneasy feeling he couldn't shake. Meanwhile, life inside apartment 3B continued almost normally. Almost. Caleb sat on the living room floor, surrounded by cardboard glue paint and tiny wooden sticks. His school science fair had announced an engineering challenge. Build your dream home. Most children copied pictures from magazines. Caleb designed something entirely different. His model included wide front steps, large windows, a community garden, a wheelchair ramp, birdhouses, even a bench where neighbors could sit together. Debra watched him work while folding laundry. "That's a lot of details." He smiled proudly. "Houses shouldn't just be pretty. What should they be? They should make people feel safe." She paused. "Who taught you that?" "You did." The answer warmed her heart more than he realized. That evening, after Caleb had gone to bed, Debra spread papers across the kitchen table. Bank statements, rental receipts, confirmation emails, canceled checks from previous years. Everything was organized in labeled folders. Her grandmother had once told her, "Keep every receipt. Honest people should always have proof." She smiled sadly at the memory. For nearly 2 hours, she matched every monthly payment against her lease agreement. Nothing was missing, nothing was late. Every amount matched exactly. She even logged into her online banking account once more. Another confirmation, rent successfully processed. She exhaled slowly. There has to be a mistake. Still, a quiet worry settled into her chest. Not because she doubted herself, because she had begun to doubt whether anyone would actually look. The next morning brought another envelope. This one was thicker. Its certified mail sticker immediately made her pulse quicken. She stood in the hallway staring at it for several seconds before opening the seal. Inside were multiple pages filled with legal language. Near the top, one sentence seemed to grow larger with every heartbeat. Notice of pending eviction review. Debra felt the hallway tilt slightly beneath her feet. "No." She whispered the word almost without sound. Caleb opened the apartment door behind her. "Mom." She quickly folded the papers. "It's nothing." But for the first time since the letters had begun arriving, she couldn't make herself smile. Far downstairs, Mason noticed the certified envelope in her trembling hands through the apartment courtyard. He immediately understood what had happened. The system had moved to the next stage, and unless someone with real authority finally listened, paperwork was about to become something far more dangerous than paper. Debra barely slept that night. The certified notice remained on the kitchen table long after Caleb had gone to bed. She read every line 3 times, searching for a sentence that would explain how a woman who had never missed a rent payment could suddenly be facing eviction. Instead, she found deadlines, case numbers, legal references, instructions to vacate if the matter was not resolved. None of them answered the only question that mattered. Why? At 7:45 the following morning, after dropping Caleb off at school, Debra walked into the regional management office carrying a neatly organized blue accordion folder. Inside were 4 years of lease agreements, payment confirmations, bank statements, maintenance requests, and every certified letter she had received. She wasn't there to argue. She only wanted someone to look. The receptionist recognized her immediately. "You again?" "I need to speak with Miss Barnes. Do you have an appointment?" "No." "I'm sorry, she's very busy." Debra took a slow breath. "I'll wait." For nearly 40 minutes, she sat quietly in the lobby while employees hurried past carrying coffee cups and laptops. No one looked at her twice. Finally, Victoria Barnes stepped out of a conference room. She was dressed in an immaculate navy suit, speaking into a wireless headset while reviewing charts on a tablet. Debra stood. "Miss Barnes?" Victoria glanced at her without slowing down. "Yes. My name is Debra Nelson. I've received an eviction notice. I believe there's been a mistake." Victoria stopped for exactly 3 seconds. "Have you contacted customer support?" "Many times." No one answered. "I brought all my payment records." She carefully lifted the blue folder. "If someone could just compare these with your files." Victoria shook her head. The case has already entered legal review, but the information is wrong. The system indicates the unit is no longer eligible. It also says the apartment was abandoned. My son and I live there. Victoria's expression remained unchanged. The database reflects occupancy status determined during the audit. Debra opened the folder. Please. She removed several bank statements. The rent cleared every month. I have receipts. Victoria didn't even lower her eyes towards the papers. I cannot review personal documentation here. It would only take a minute. Our legal department handles disputes. I'm trying to stop this before it becomes a legal dispute. I'm sorry. No, you're following procedure. The words sounded rehearsed. Debra's shoulders sank slightly. So, what am I supposed to do? Victoria answered without hesitation. Wait for further communication. Then she walked away. The conversation had lasted less than 2 minutes. Debra remained standing in the lobby, still holding the documents no one had been willing to read. A young employee passing nearby slowed for a second. He looked at the folder, at the worried expression on her face, then at Victoria disappearing down the hallway. He lowered his eyes and kept walking. Nobody wanted to challenge the system. Outside, the October wind carried dried leaves across the parking lot. Debra sat inside her aging silver Honda Civic without starting the engine. She rested both hands on the steering wheel. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. Not loudly. Just enough for silent tears to fall onto the stack of carefully organized receipts in her lap. She wiped them away before anyone could see. Then she looked at the tiny wooden house hanging from her keys. Home is where we keep each other. She whispered the words slowly. I'm trying. Back at Maple Terrace, Mason Rivera couldn't stop thinking about apartment 3B. He logged into the maintenance system again during lunch. The status had changed. Eviction preparation. His stomach tightened. He clicked through internal notes. Automated inspection complete. Occupancy verification waived. Final authorization approved. Every step had been processed electronically. Not one human signature appeared anywhere on the approval chain. He printed another copy and walked toward Victoria's office. This time she didn't invite him inside. What now? Miss Barnes. This isn't right. The apartment isn't empty. I know the family. I've repaired their kitchen. I've fixed their heater. The boy lives there. Victoria folded her arms. The audit has already closed. So, reopen it. We don't reopen completed reviews. What if the computer is wrong? The computer follows policy. Mason looked directly at her. Computers don't know children. For the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed her face. Our vacancy recovery numbers have improved 32% this quarter. We are finally operating efficiently. He stared at her. So, efficiency matters more than accuracy. It matters that everyone follows the same process. And if the process hurts innocent people, Victoria picked up another file. Then legal will decide. You need to return to maintenance. The meeting was over. Mason walked out feeling more helpless than he had in years. That afternoon, Debra arrived home just before Caleb's school bus. She forced herself to straighten the apartment, fold laundry, prepare dinner, sweep the kitchen floor. Normal routines helped silence anxious thoughts. When Caleb burst through the door carrying his cardboard house project, his smile filled the room. Mom. My teacher loved it. He placed the model carefully on the dining table. Tiny paper windows, hand-painted flowers, a front porch made from popsicle sticks. Above the doorway, written in blue marker, were the words, Welcome home. It's beautiful, Debra said honestly. Caleb looked at her. You don't sound happy. She hesitated. just tired. He studied her face longer than most adults would have. Finally, he walked over, took her apartment keys from the counter, and gently tapped the little wooden house. "This still means we're okay." She swallowed hard. "Why do you think that?" "Because it's not about the building. It's about us." She smiled this time. A real smile. Then she hugged him so tightly that he laughed. "Mom." "I can't breathe." "I'm sorry." "No." He grinned. "I like hugs." That evening, while Caleb finished his homework, another email arrived. Subject: final notice before enforcement action. Debra stared at the screen. This time there was no request for clarification, no invitation to call, no suggestion that someone would review the evidence she had spent days gathering. Only one sentence stood out. Enforcement personnel may arrive within the next several business days. Debra slowly closed her laptop. Across the room, Caleb continued coloring tiny trees around the paper house for his school project, completely unaware that the real home surrounding him was slipping away one automated decision at a time. The knock came at exactly 8:12 on a gray Thursday morning. Debra had just zipped Caleb's blue backpack and reminded him not to forget his science project, which sat carefully wrapped in a large cardboard box near the front door. 3 firm knocks echoed through the apartment. She opened the door to find 2 uniformed civil deputies, a representative from the property management company, and a locksmith carrying a metal toolbox. For a brief moment, no one spoke. "Miss Debra Nelson?" one deputy finally asked. "Yes." He looked genuinely uncomfortable as he handed her a document. "We're here to enforce a court-authorized eviction order." Debra stared at the paper without really seeing the words. "There has to be a mistake." "I've brought proof. I've paid every month." The representative from Evergreen Residential Services barely glanced at her. "If you have questions, you'll need to contact the legal department. I've been trying for over a week. No one will answer me." "I'm sorry, ma'am." His voice suggested habit more than sympathy. "We're here only to carry out the order." Caleb stepped into the hallway holding his school project. "Mom?" Debra quickly knelt beside him. "Go back inside for a minute." "But who are they?" She forced herself to smile. "They're checking something." The deputies exchanged uneasy glances. One of them quietly spoke to the locksmith. "Give her some time." Debra rushed back into the apartment. Her heartbeat pounded so loudly she could barely think. She grabbed important documents first: birth certificates, social security cards, medical records, then photographs, a small jewelry box that had belonged to her late mother, Caleb's baby blanket, his school awards. There wasn't enough time to think about what mattered most. Everything mattered. "What should I pack?" Caleb asked quietly. "The things you love." He looked around his room. Instead of toys, he picked up 3 things: his science project, a framed photograph of him and his mother at Lake Erie, and the little wooden house keychain that hung from the apartment keys. Debra noticed. "You don't want your video games?" He shook his head. "We can buy games someday." "We can't make another one of these." He held up the wooden house. Her throat tightened. Outside, neighbors slowly gathered in the courtyard. Some watched silently from balconies. Others whispered to one another. Harold Jenkins hurried across the parking lot as fast as his aging knees allowed. "Debra." He stopped beside the deputies. "There has to be some misunderstanding." "I've lived next to her for 4 years. She's one of the best neighbors we've ever had." One deputy nodded respectfully. "I understand, sir. But we can't stop the order." Harold looked toward the property representative. "You know she's paid her rent." The man lowered his eyes. "I don't have authority over the case." "Then find someone who does." Nobody answered. At 8:47, the locksmith stepped forward. "I'm sorry. We have to proceed." Debra carried the last box outside herself. She refused to let strangers pack her family's life. Every trip down the stairs felt heavier. Kitchen dishes, winter coats, books. The lamp Caleb insisted helped him sleep. The little basil plant from the windowsill. Neighbors quietly stepped forward to help carry boxes, despite management's instructions not to interfere. No one spoke much. Sometimes kindness needs no words. Across the street, a white news van slowed to a stop. Emily Carter, a reporter for Cleveland Channel 8, had originally been assigned to cover rising housing costs in the city. The camera operator noticed the deputies. "Looks like another eviction," Emily sighed softly. "They've become almost routine." Still, she walked closer. Professional instinct told her every story deserved at least one careful look. She saw cardboard boxes stacked neatly rather than thrown carelessly. She saw neighbors helping instead of arguing. She saw a little boy carrying a school project instead of crying. Something about the scene felt different. She quietly motioned for the camera to begin recording. The cameraman captured Debra thanking every neighbor individually. "I'm sorry you all had to see this," Harold answered immediately. "You have nothing to apologize for." Emily noticed the exchange. Most eviction stories she had covered ended with shouting. This one was filled with dignity. As the final lock was installed, the property representative taped an official notice across the apartment door. Debra instinctively reached toward her keyring. The keys were useless now. As she lowered her hand, the old metal ring slipped from her fingers. It struck the concrete walkway, coins, keys, and the tiny wooden house scattered across the wet pavement. The previous night's rain had left shallow puddles everywhere. Caleb immediately ran forward. He ignored the apartment keys, ignored the scattered coins, ignored everything except the little wooden house lying upside down in muddy water. He carefully lifted it with both hands. The blue paint had chipped slightly. He wiped it clean using the sleeve of his hoodie. Emily's camera zoomed in almost without her realizing why. Then Caleb looked up at his mother. His voice was soft, almost too soft for the microphone. "They locked the door," he paused, "but they can't lock us out of being a family." No one moved. Even the cameraman lowered the camera for a second before raising it again. One deputy quietly cleared his throat and looked away. Harold removed his cap. Debra took the wooden keychain from Caleb's hand only long enough to brush away the remaining drops of water. Then she clipped it back onto the keyring. She crouched beside her son. "No, they can't." She kissed his forehead. "We'll find our way." Emily felt something tighten in her chest. This was no longer just another housing story. It was about what remained after everything material had been taken away. As the news crew packed up, she turned to her cameraman. "We're leading tonight with this." "Really?" "Yes. People need to see them." That evening, at exactly 6:03 p.m., millions of ordinary routines paused across Northeast Ohio. Families sat down for dinner. Restaurant televisions played local news. Airport lounges buzzed with delayed flights. Hospital waiting rooms glowed beneath fluorescent lights. Then the screen filled with the image of a soaked little boy holding a tiny wooden house in both hands while standing beside stacks of cardboard boxes. Emily's voice narrated calmly. Today, one Cleveland family lost their apartment under circumstances that neighbors insist make no sense. Far away in an airport lounge, a silver-haired billionaire waiting to board his flight looked up from his tablet just as the camera focused on the eviction notice taped to apartment 3B. His eyes froze on one unmistakable detail: the logo printed across the top. Whitmore Living Communities. The company he had built with a promise that no hard-working family should ever lose a home because the system stopped seeing them as people. Ryan Whitmore had watched thousands of news broadcasts in his life, most of them blurred together. Market updates, economic forecasts, political debates, corporate interviews. He rarely remembered any of them after they ended. But at 6:03 that Thursday evening, sitting alone in a leather chair inside Cleveland Hopkins International Airport's executive lounge, one 90-second local news segment stopped time. The television above the coffee station showed a little boy lifting a wooden house keychain from a rain puddle. Then came the eviction notice. Ryan's eyes locked onto the logo before the camera moved away. Whitmore Living Communities, his company. His breathing slowed. No. He leaned forward. The anchor continued. Neighbors say the tenant had reportedly paid rent consistently, though the management company has declined to comment while legal proceedings remain active. Ryan barely heard the rest. His attention stayed on the woman's face. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't demanding sympathy. She was helping an elderly neighbor carry one of her own boxes while her son balanced a school project under one arm. The reporter asked, "Do you have anything you'd like to say?" The woman smiled, though exhaustion was written across every line of her face. "I just hope someone checks the paperwork." That was all. No accusations, no bitterness, just one quiet sentence. Ryan reached for the remote and replayed the segment through the lounge's news archive. Again and again. Each time he noticed something different. The neatly labeled boxes, the little boy protecting the wooden keychain, the neighbors standing beside them, the deputies avoiding eye contact. None of it looked like the evictions he had been assured only happened after months of unpaid rent and repeated legal notices. His assistant, Claire Donovan, returned carrying 2 coffees. "Boarding starts in 20 minutes. Ryan didn't answer. "Ryan," he pointed towards the television, "find out where this happened." Claire looked confused. "It's just a local news story." "No," he spoke quietly. "It's one of ours." She watched the replay. When she noticed the company logo, her expression changed. "I'll call headquarters." "Not headquarters." He stood. "They'll prepare answers." "I want facts." Claire immediately understood. She had worked beside Ryan for 12 years. She knew the difference between curiosity and conviction. This was conviction. 5 minutes later, the private jet waiting in Chicago received unexpected instructions. Flight canceled. All meetings postponed. Every executive on Ryan's schedule received the same brief message. Chairman returning to Cleveland immediately. No explanation followed. As Claire drove them away from the airport, Ryan remained unusually silent. Rain tapped softly against the car windows. Outside headlights reflected across wet pavement. Finally, he spoke. "Do you know why I started Whitmore Living Communities?" Claire had heard parts of the story before. "You've mentioned your childhood." He nodded. "When I was 10. His voice became distant. "My father lost his factory job. We fell behind on rent." He looked through the rain-covered glass. "The landlord never met us. Never asked questions. One morning, someone simply changed the locks." Claire remained silent. She knew he wasn't looking for conversation. Ryan continued. "My mother kept apologizing. Not because she'd done something wrong. Because she thought she'd failed me." He closed his eyes. "I remember standing on a sidewalk holding one cardboard box. My entire childhood fit inside it." The image from the television returned. A little boy, a cardboard box, a wooden house. The similarities unsettled him. "When I built the company," Ryan said quietly, "I promised myself no hard-working family would ever feel invisible." Claire glanced at him. "You honestly believed you'd kept that promise?" "I did." The words carried more regret than certainty. By the time they reached corporate headquarters, most employees had already gone home. The building felt strangely hollow. Only security staff and a few finance teams remained. Ryan walked directly into the executive conference room. Large photographs lined the walls, affordable apartment communities, families smiling on playgrounds, children riding bicycles, marketing slogans celebrated opportunity, dignity, and belonging. For the first time in years, Ryan stopped long enough to truly look at them. "They're beautiful pictures." Claire nodded. "They are." He looked away. "I wonder how many stopped matching reality." Without waiting for anyone else, Ryan unlocked a cabinet containing archived annual reports. He pulled out the company's original mission statement written 28 years earlier. The first sentence read, "Every family deserves stability before profitability." He ran his fingers slowly across the page. "I wrote this myself." His voice barely rose above a whisper. Claire noticed something she had never seen before. His hands were trembling. An hour later, she returned, carrying the first documents she could obtain without alerting senior management. "The property belongs to Evergreen Residential Services." Ryan frowned. "We sold Evergreen?" "No." Claire shook her head. "It's still owned by Whitmore. It's one of our subsidiary management companies." His eyebrows narrowed. "I've never heard of this eviction." "The board receives quarterly summaries. Individual cases aren't reported." Ryan looked through the documents. Property revenue, occupancy percentages, recovery statistics. Everything appeared excellent. Too excellent. There are no tenant names. No case details. Just numbers. Claire hesitated. "That's how the reports have been structured for years." Ryan slowly closed the folder. Exactly. He finally understood what had been bothering him. The reports were efficient, accurate, profitable. Yet nowhere inside hundreds of pages did a single family exist. Only percentages, only metrics, only financial performance. Not one child, not one grandmother, not one story. The people had disappeared long before the paperwork failed them. At 10:41 p.m., Ryan made a decision that surprised even Claire. No press releases. No legal statements. No executive briefings. What do you want instead? He picked up his car keys. "I want to meet the people." "Personally." Claire blinked. "Without security. Without announcements. Without anyone cleaning up before I arrive." He looked once more at the paused image on the conference room television. Debra Nelson, kneeling beside her son. The little wooden house hanging from a worn key ring. "I don't need another report. I need to find out how my company stopped seeing human beings." Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Across Cleveland, Debra and Caleb were settling into the cheapest motel room they could afford for the night, unaware that the man whose company's name had appeared on their eviction notice had just abandoned every meeting on his calendar. For the first time in decades, Ryan Whitmore was no longer traveling as a billionaire. He was returning to the city as a frightened 10-year-old boy who still remembered what it felt like to lose the only place he had ever called home. By 7 o'clock the next morning, Ryan Whitmore was driving through the east side of Cleveland in a dark gray pickup truck borrowed from the company's motor pool instead of his usual chauffeur-driven sedan. He had left his tailored suit hanging in the office. Today he wore faded jeans, brown work boots, and a navy windbreaker with no company logo. Claire had questioned the decision. "What if someone recognizes you?" Ryan smiled faintly. "They won't." "It's amazing how invisible an older man becomes when he isn't wearing a suit." He parked 2 blocks away from Maple Terrace Apartments. The buildings looked older than the promotional photographs in the company's annual reports. Paint peeled from several balconies. The landscaping was tidy enough, but neglected corners told stories no financial statement ever could. A maintenance cart rolled slowly across the parking lot. Ryan recognized the man immediately from personnel records Claire had pulled overnight. Mason Rivera, the maintenance supervisor. Ryan approached him casually. "Morning." Mason looked up. "Morning. You work here?" "For almost 15 years. Ryan nodded toward a loose railing near one of the staircases. "I own a few rental properties outside Akron. I came to look at how larger companies manage maintenance." It wasn't entirely a lie. Mason chuckled. "Then you've picked an interesting week." Ryan noticed the fatigue beneath the man's eyes. "Tough week." Mason leaned against the cart. "You could say that?" He hesitated. "We lost a good family yesterday." Ryan kept his expression neutral. "The eviction." Mason studied him. "You saw the news." Everybody did. Mason sighed. "The television only showed the last hour. It didn't show the weeks before." Ryan waited. People often filled silence with truth. They marked her apartment vacant. But she lived there. They ignored every payment record. "I tried telling management." "They never listened," Ryan asked quietly. "The mother? What was she like?" Mason laughed softly. "The kind of tenant every landlord hopes for. Always paid. Never complained. Helped neighbors. If an elderly resident needed groceries carried upstairs, she'd do it before anyone asked." Ryan listened without interrupting. "And the boy?" "Caleb." Mason smiled for the first time. "Sweet kid. He built birdhouses. He always thanked me whenever I fixed something." Ryan looked toward apartment 3B. Fresh locks still gleamed on the door. "What happened after they left?" Mason's smile disappeared. "They apologized." Ryan frowned. "They apologized." "To the neighbors. They kept saying they were sorry everyone had to witness it." Ryan lowered his eyes. Children and good people, he thought, always apologizing for wounds they didn't create. As Mason returned to his maintenance cart, an elderly man slowly crossed the courtyard carrying a reusable shopping bag. Ryan recognized him from the television report. Harold Jenkins. He walked carefully, favoring one knee. Ryan stepped forward. "Need a hand?" Harold smiled gratefully. "Wouldn't say no." Together they carried the groceries toward the second building. "You new around here?" Harold asked. "Just looking?" "For what?" Ryan considered the question. "I'm not completely sure." Harold laughed. "Fair enough." When they reached the stairs, Harold rested for a moment. "You asking about yesterday?" Ryan nodded. "I heard there was an eviction." Harold looked toward the third floor. "There was. But that wasn't justice. That was paperwork pretending to be justice." The sentence stayed with Ryan. Paperwork pretending to be justice. Harold continued. "Debra baked me bread every Thanksgiving. She checked on me during snowstorms. When my arthritis flared up, Caleb shoveled my walkway before school." He smiled at the memory. The boy's shovel was bigger than he was. Ryan felt an unexpected lump form in his throat. No television crew filmed that. Harold shook his head. They only came at the end. Ryan asked carefully, "Did she ever talk about money?" "Never. She worked. Budgeted. Made do. If she was struggling, she hid it with dignity." Ryan looked across the courtyard again. Everything seemed ordinary. Children rode bicycles. Laundry fluttered from a few balconies. Someone grilled hamburgers nearby. It looked like every affordable housing community he'd ever visited for ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Except now he couldn't stop imagining how many unseen stories lived behind every door. As Harold headed inside, he turned back. "You know what bothered me most?" Ryan waited. After they locked the apartment, the maintenance man kept staring at the paperwork. He looked like someone who wanted to stop a train with his bare hands. Ryan thanked him quietly. A few minutes later, he found Mason repairing a leaking outdoor faucet. "Can I ask you one more thing?" Mason straightened. "Sure." "If you knew something was wrong, why didn't anyone higher up listen?" Mason gave a tired smile. "Because computers were talking louder than people." Ryan remained silent. The regional office trusts dashboards, charts, performance numbers. If the system says something questioning, it makes you look like you're questioning management. So, eventually, he shrugged, people stop speaking. Those words struck Ryan harder than any accusation could have. People stop speaking, not because they stop caring, because they stop believing anyone is listening. Claire called just after noon. "I've been reviewing historical files." "What did you find?" "There have been 27 disputed evictions in subsidiary-managed properties over the last 18 months. Ryan stopped walking. 27. Those are only the ones formally appealed. There could be more. He closed his eyes. How did none of this reach me? The reports categorized them as administrative recoveries. Administrative recoveries. Not families, not lives, recoveries. Ryan ended the call and sat alone on a weathered wooden bench facing the apartment buildings. Across from him, children laughed on a playground that Whitmore living communities had proudly advertised in brochures. He watched a little girl push another child on a swing. A mother waved from a balcony. An elderly couple shared coffee. Then his eyes drifted upward to the third floor. Apartment 3B remained silent, locked, empty, not because the family had failed, because the system had. For the first time since founding the company nearly 3 decades earlier, Ryan realized he no longer knew how many families had quietly disappeared behind the polished numbers presented in board meetings. And if Debra Nelson's story had reached the evening news only because a reporter happened to stop that day, how many others had vanished without anyone ever pointing a camera in their direction? Ryan Whitmore arrived at corporate headquarters before sunrise the next morning. The lobby was still empty except for a security guard polishing the front desk and a janitor quietly mopping the marble floor. For years, Ryan had walked through these doors surrounded by executives' assistants and scheduled meetings. Today, he entered carrying nothing but a leather notebook filled with handwritten observations from Maple Terrace. Not one line mentioned profits. Every page contained names: Debra, Caleb, Mason, Harold. He laid the notebook on the conference table before the executive team arrived. At precisely 8:00 a.m., Victoria Barnes entered with several department heads. She looked surprised to see Ryan already waiting. "Mr. Whitmore, I wasn't expecting you until next week. I changed my plans." His voice was calm. "So I heard." She took her seat, unaware of the direction the meeting was about to take. Within minutes, the room filled with vice presidents, legal advisors, finance directors, and operations managers. Ryan waited until everyone settled. "Let's begin." A large screen displayed the quarterly performance dashboard. Occupancy rates, revenue growth, maintenance costs, recovery percentages. Victoria smiled confidently. "I'm pleased to report that property recovery efficiency has increased by 34% this quarter." Several executives nodded approvingly. "Our vacancy processing time has been reduced by nearly half." "Excellent work," someone said. Ryan looked around the room. "Can anyone explain what property recovery means?" Silence followed. Finally, the finance director answered. "It refers to reclaiming underperforming units." Ryan nodded slowly. "And what is an underperforming unit?" Victoria answered without hesitation. "A residence that fails to meet operational expectations." Ryan leaned back. Does anyone in this room hear the word family in that definition? No one spoke. He pressed a button on the remote. The dashboard disappeared. In its place appeared a still image from Emily Carter's news report. Debra standing in the rain. Caleb holding the tiny wooden house. The room became noticeably quieter. Victoria's posture stiffened. This was one isolated incident. Ryan looked directly at her. Was it? He nodded toward Claire, who distributed thick folders around the table. Open page 14. The executives flipped through the documents. Inside were the findings Claire had worked through most of the night compiling. 27 disputed eviction cases. Repeated data mismatches. Ignored internal warnings. Maintenance reports contradicting occupancy records. Employee complaints, emails, audit summaries. Ryan spoke softly. Mason Rivera reported concerns. He was ignored. Residents submitted payment records. They were ignored. Appeals entered automated processing. They were ignored. He paused. What exactly have we been managing? No one answered. Victoria finally broke the silence. With respect, Chairman Whitmore, these are unfortunate exceptions. Our overall performance remains excellent. Ryan folded his hands. Tell me something. When did we begin rewarding regional offices for the number of units recovered? Victoria opened another report. Approximately 3 years ago. It improved financial efficiency. Whose idea was it? She hesitated for the first time. The Executive Operations Committee. I asked whose. A long silence settled over the room. Finally, she answered. I recommended the incentive structure. Ryan nodded once. And how were bonuses calculated? She cleared her throat. Recovery volume. Occupancy turnover. Rental optimization. Claire quietly added another slide to the screen. A spreadsheet appeared. Regional bonus formula. The highlighted section showed one category worth nearly 40% of annual executive bonuses. Recovered units. Ryan stared at it for several seconds. Then he looked back at Victoria. So every apartment reclaimed increased management bonuses. She answered carefully. It encouraged operational discipline. No. Ryan's voice remained calm. It encouraged removing people. It encouraged speed over accuracy. It encouraged trusting software instead of human beings. Victoria straightened in her chair. The system followed legal procedures. Ryan replied immediately. Legal doesn't always mean right. The words echoed across the conference room. Sophia Whitmore, who had remained silent until then, closed the legal folder in front of her. As outside counsel, I reviewed the Nelson file this morning. Everyone turned toward her. There are at least 6 procedural inconsistencies. The payment history was never manually verified. The occupancy dispute was never investigated. The maintenance logs directly contradicted the audit. She looked toward Victoria. Those records should have halted enforcement automatically. Victoria frowned. The software didn't flag them. Sophia answered quietly. Exactly. Ryan stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Cleveland. Without turning around, he spoke. When I founded this company, my first employee was my mother. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. She answered tenant phone calls. If someone couldn't pay rent, she knew their children's names. She knew who had lost jobs, who had cancer, who needed 1 extra week. He turned back. We weren't successful because we collected every dollar. We were successful because people trusted us. He picked up the wooden mission statement he had brought from the archives. The edges of the paper had yellowed with age. He read the opening sentence aloud. Every family deserves stability before profitability. He slowly lowered the page. Tell me, when did profitability erase the family? No one had an answer. The room remained perfectly still. Ryan walked back to his chair and placed both hands on the table. Effective immediately. Every executive instinctively sat straighter. All eviction actions across every Whitmore subsidiary are suspended pending independent review. Several people looked stunned. Victoria spoke first. That will cost millions. Ryan nodded. So will losing our integrity. She tried again. Our shareholders invested in my company. He interrupted gently. They did not invest in cruelty disguised as efficiency. Another silence followed. Ryan looked toward Claire. Contact every regional office. No automated eviction proceeds without direct human verification. He turned to Sophia. I want every disputed case reopened. Starting with Debra Nelson. Sophia nodded once. It'll be done. Ryan then looked directly at Victoria. Until the investigation is complete, you're relieved of operational authority. The words landed like a stone. Victoria's face lost all color. You can't seriously believe I intended to hurt anyone. Ryan's expression softened, but only slightly. I believe something more dangerous. You stopped seeing people. No one in the room could argue with that. As the executives quietly gathered their papers, Ryan remained seated, staring at the frozen image of Caleb holding the little wooden house. For years, quarterly meetings had begun with charts. Next time he thought they would begin with a different question. Not how many units had been recovered, but how many lives had been protected. And somewhere across Cleveland, completely unaware that an entire corporate structure had just begun to shift beneath her feet, Debra Nelson finished another exhausting shift at the bakery before returning to the tiny motel room she and Caleb now called home. The Sunset Motor Lodge charged $58 a night. The faded neon sign outside promised clean rooms and free Wi-Fi, though one of the letters no longer lit up, and the internet rarely worked well enough to stream a short video. Room 114 became home for Debra and Caleb. It contained 2 narrow beds, a dented microwave, a tiny refrigerator that buzzed loudly through the night, and a window overlooking a cracked parking lot where 18-wheel trucks sometimes idled until dawn. It wasn't comfortable, but it had a lock on the door. For now, that was enough. Every morning, Debra still woke at 4:30. Some habits survived every hardship. She quietly folded the blankets before Caleb opened his eyes. Then she heated instant oatmeal using the microwave and packed his lunch while balancing groceries on the small countertop barely wider than a cutting board. When Caleb finally sat up, he smiled as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Morning, Mom. Morning. He stretched and looked around the room. It still smells like old carpet. Debra laughed softly. I noticed that too. I think the carpet is older than Grandpa Harold. That made her laugh a little harder. For a few precious seconds, the motel room felt less like a temporary shelter and more like a place where joy had refused to leave. After breakfast, Caleb carefully clipped the tiny wooden house keychain onto his backpack zipper instead of the apartment keys. Debra noticed. You moved it. He nodded. We don't have apartment keys anymore. His words carried no anger, only simple observation. So now it stays with us. She touched the little wooden house with one finger. That's a good place for it. The school bus couldn't stop at the motel, so every morning they walked nearly 20 minutes to a nearby intersection. They never complained. Instead, Caleb used the walk to count squirrels or guess how many birds sat on telephone wires. Children often found games where adults only saw inconvenience. Once Caleb climbed onto the bus, Debra caught another city bus toward Harper's Corner Bakery. She had considered asking for extra shifts. Instead, she decided against it. If she worked every available hour, Caleb would spend evenings alone in a motel room. Some things cost more than money. At the bakery, Olivia immediately noticed the exhaustion beneath Debra's smile. "You look tired." "I've had a busy week." Olivia hesitated. "I saw something on the news." Debra froze for only a heartbeat. "I'm sorry." "I didn't know it was you until yesterday." Debra simply nodded. "I didn't really want anyone to know." Olivia reached across the counter and squeezed her hand. "If you need anything." Debra smiled gratefully. "Thank you." "I'll be okay." She always answered that way. Not because she never needed help, because she refused to let hardship become her identity. Business remained steady throughout the morning. Coffee orders, fresh bread, birthday cakes. Life continued moving around her as though nothing had changed. Yet every time a customer jingled apartment keys while paying for breakfast, Debra instinctively reached toward her own pocket before remembering there was no familiar keyring anymore. Only the tiny wooden house now hanging from Caleb's backpack. That evening she stopped by a discount grocery store before returning to the motel. She compared prices with the same careful attention she had always practiced. Canned soup, rice, frozen vegetables, a gallon of milk, nothing unnecessary. As she waited in the checkout line, she noticed the woman ahead of her quietly removing items from her basket after checking the total on the register. First the oranges, then cereal, then diapers. Her little daughter watched silently. "I only have $43, the woman whispered apologetically. The cashier nodded sympathetically. Debra looked into her own basket. She didn't have much. Still, she stepped forward. "I'll cover the difference." The woman immediately shook her head. "Oh no, I couldn't." "It's okay?" "No, really." Debra smiled gently. "Someone once helped my mother. I've never forgotten." The cashier finished scanning the remaining items. It cost $12.68. Money Debra couldn't easily spare. Money she chose to spend anyway. The young mother's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." Debra simply nodded. "Take care of your little girl." As she walked toward the parking lot, Caleb looked up at her. "We're trying to save money." "We are." "Then why did you do that?" Debra unlocked the old Honda and placed the groceries inside. "Because one hard day shouldn't become two families' hard day." Caleb thought quietly for a moment. Then he smiled. "I think Grandma would have done that." "So do I." Back at the motel, they prepared soup in paper bowls using hot water from the coffee machine. Not exactly dinner, but warm enough. Later that night, while Caleb finished homework on the small table beside the window, someone knocked gently on the door. Debra opened it to find Harold Jenkins standing outside with 2 reusable grocery bags. "You drove all the way here," Harold smiled. "I had some extra things." Inside the bags were homemade chicken soup, clean towels, fresh fruit, and a small potted basil plant. "I remembered you liked growing herbs." Debra covered her mouth. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he smiled, "but you would have." Caleb immediately hugged the older man. "I missed you." "I missed you too, kiddo." For nearly an hour they talked about ordinary things. School, baseball, the weather. No one mentioned the eviction. Sometimes dignity means allowing people one evening without discussing their pain. Before leaving, Harold looked around the tiny room. "It isn't much," Debra answered quietly. "No. But we're together." Caleb reached for the little wooden house hanging from his backpack. He held it up proudly. "We brought home with us." Harold looked at the carved words on its back. "Home is where we keep each other." He smiled, though his eyes had become suspiciously bright. After Harold left, Debra tucked Caleb into bed. Outside rain began falling again against the motel window. She sat alone beside the glass long after Caleb fell asleep, wondering how many more nights they could afford to stay. She still had no idea that across town, Ryan Whitmore had ordered every disputed eviction file reopened, or that her name now sat on top of the very first folder waiting on his desk. 3 days after suspending every eviction across Whitmore living communities, Ryan Whitmore asked Claire not to schedule a single meeting before noon. Instead, he handed her a folded piece of paper. On it were only 3 addresses: Harper's Corner Bakery, Sunset Motor Lodge, Lincoln Elementary School. Claire looked at him curiously. No board meeting. Ryan shook his head. I've listened to executives for years. It's time I listened to the people living with our decisions. Just after 7 in the morning, Ryan entered Harper's Corner Bakery, wearing the same plain windbreaker he had worn at Maple Terrace. The breakfast rush had already begun. The smell of fresh bread, cinnamon rolls, and coffee filled the small shop. He joined the line without drawing attention. From the far end of the counter, he immediately recognized Debra. She moved quickly between customers, balancing trays, refilling coffee, answering questions, and greeting nearly everyone by name. Good morning, Mr. Collins. The blueberry muffins are fresh today. Mrs. Evans, how's your husband feeling after surgery? A tired construction worker reached the register and searched every pocket of his jacket. His face reddened. I'm sorry. I left my wallet in my truck. I'll have to come back, Debra smiled. You come in every Thursday. You've never missed paying before. She placed the coffee and breakfast sandwich into a paper bag. Take it. You can pay tomorrow. The man hesitated. I don't like owing people. I know. That's why I'm not worried. He accepted the bag with quiet gratitude. Ryan noticed something important. Debra hadn't looked around to see whether anyone was watching. Kindness wasn't a performance for her. It was simply how she lived. A few minutes later, another customer accidentally dropped a leather wallet near the cream station before rushing outside. No one else seemed to notice. Debra did. She picked it up, opened it just enough to find identification, then hurried after the customer through the parking lot. Sir, the man turned. You forgot this. He checked the wallet. Every dollar remained inside. My goodness. There was almost $900 in here. You could have... He stopped himself. Debra smiled politely. I hope someone would do the same for me. Ryan watched the exchange through the bakery window. There was no hesitation, no expectation of reward, only quiet honesty. When Debra returned inside, Olivia shook her head. You never even looked surprised? Debra laughed softly. If I keep what isn't mine, I'll lose something much more valuable. Ryan carried those words with him as he left the bakery. Late that afternoon, he drove to Sunset Motor Lodge. He parked across the street where he could observe without intruding. Children played with a worn basketball near the edge of the parking lot. Several parents sat outside their rooms talking quietly. Life continued despite uncertainty. Around 5 o'clock, Debra's old silver Honda pulled into the lot. She stepped out carrying 2 grocery bags. Caleb climbed out behind her with his backpack. As they walked toward room 114, another little boy sat alone on the curb. He couldn't have been older than 7. His bicycle chain had slipped off, leaving black grease across his hands. He looked frustrated. Without saying a word, Caleb handed his backpack to his mother and walked over. Can I help? I can't fix it. My grandpa showed me once. The 2 boys knelt beside the bicycle. After several minutes of trial and error, the chain slipped back into place. The younger boy smiled so widely that it transformed his entire face. It works, Caleb shrugged modestly. My hands always get dirty. The other boy laughed. So do mine. Ryan smiled without realizing it. Children often revealed the values they had been taught better than adults ever could. Then something unexpected happened. The younger boy's mother stepped outside. She looked exhausted. Dark circles surrounded her eyes. "I'm sorry he bothered you." "He didn't bother me," Caleb answered. Debra walked over carrying one of the grocery bags. "I made vegetable soup tonight." "We have enough." The woman immediately shook her head. "Oh no." "I couldn't." Debra smiled exactly as she had in the grocery store. "I wasn't asking. I was sharing." 20 minutes later, the two families sat together on folding chairs outside the motel rooms, eating soup from paper bowls, while the children laughed over the repaired bicycle. Ryan remained inside his truck. He felt strangely like an outsider looking through a window into a world where generosity had somehow survived poverty. His phone rang. It was Sophia. "Dad, I finished reviewing another batch of files." "And?" "There are more." "How many?" "Too many." She paused. "I think the Nelson case isn't unusual. I think it's simply the first one anyone noticed." Ryan closed his eyes. "I was afraid you'd say that. You need to understand something." Sophia continued gently. "This isn't only about one policy. It's about a culture. People became afraid to question the system." Ryan looked toward the motel. Debra was laughing at something Caleb had said. For the first time since seeing the news report, he noticed she had a beautiful laugh. Not loud, not dramatic, just genuine. The kind of laugh that hardship had not yet managed to steal. "I've been watching her all day," Ryan admitted quietly. "And she keeps choosing kindness. Even now." Sophia remained silent. Finally, Ryan spoke again. "I thought leadership meant creating efficient systems." "I was wrong. What does it mean now?" He watched Caleb remove the tiny wooden house keychain from his backpack and let the younger boy hold it for a moment. The two children smiled as though it were a priceless treasure. Ryan answered almost to himself. "It means making sure good people never have to fight the system alone." As dusk settled over the motel parking lot, he started the truck and drove away before anyone noticed he had been there. He still wasn't ready to introduce himself. Not until he had done more than apologize. Not until he had earned the right to stand in front of Debra Nelson and say that the company bearing his name had finally remembered the people it was built to serve. Monday morning began unlike any other in the history of Whitmore living communities. At 8:30 a.m., every executive vice president, regional director, legal advisor, and property manager across the company's subsidiaries either sat inside the headquarters auditorium or joined through a secure video conference. No one had been told the agenda. Only one sentence appeared in the meeting invitation: mandatory leadership review. Rumors had spread all weekend. Some believed Ryan Whitmore was preparing to announce a major acquisition. Others expected cost-cutting measures after suspending evictions nationwide. Victoria Barnes expected neither. She expected to defend her decisions. She entered the auditorium carrying 3 binders filled with performance reports, financial projections, and legal documentation. Everything she believed supported her actions. Ryan walked onto the stage without music or introduction. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit. Instead, he wore a simple navy blazer over an open-collar white shirt. He carried no presentation notes, only the same worn leather notebook. The room fell silent. "For 28 years, Ryan began, I've believed our greatest asset was real estate." He paused. "I was wrong." Several executives exchanged puzzled looks. "Our greatest asset has always been trust." He pressed a button on the remote. Instead of revenue charts, the large screen displayed a photograph of Maple Terrace apartments. Then another image appeared. Cardboard boxes lined along a rain-soaked sidewalk. Debra standing beside them. Caleb holding the small wooden house. Many people in the room recognized the news story. Others looked uncomfortable. Ryan spoke quietly. This family lived in one of our communities. No missed rent. No property damage. No abandoned apartment. He looked around the auditorium. Yet we removed them anyway. Victoria stood. Mr. Whitmore, with respect, that matter remains under internal review. Ryan nodded. It does? But today isn't only about one family. He signaled toward Claire. The screen changed again. A map of the United States appeared. Red dots spread across multiple states: Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Kentucky. Each dot represents a disputed eviction currently under reinvestigation. A murmur swept through the audience. The number in the corner continued climbing. 12, 19, 34, 41. Ryan let the room absorb the image. We built systems that rewarded speed. We measured numbers. We celebrated efficiency. We forgot people. Victoria stepped toward the microphone. Our procedures complied with every applicable regulation. Ryan looked directly at her. I've read every regulation, so have our attorneys. That's not the question. He stepped away from the podium. The question is this. If a hard-working mother stands in front of us holding proof she paid every month, and our first response is to trust software instead of her, have we really done the right thing? No one answered. Ryan turned towards the audience. Last Thursday, I visited Maple Terrace. Heads lifted. I didn't go as chairman. I went as an ordinary man. I spoke with the maintenance supervisor. I spoke with neighbors. I stood outside apartment 3B. He paused. Do you know what every single person talked about? Silence. Not unpaid rent. Not property damage. They talked about kindness. They talked about a woman who carried groceries for an elderly neighbor. They talked about a little boy who shoveled snow before school. His voice grew firmer. Our reports never mentioned those things. They couldn't. Because we stopped collecting information about people. Mason Rivera entered quietly from a side door. Several regional managers looked surprised. Ryan gestured toward him. This is Mason. He reported concerns before the eviction. He was ignored. Mason approached the microphone nervously. I've worked maintenance for 15 years. I know when pipes leak. I know when elevators break. And I know when a family lives in an apartment. A few uneasy laughs echoed before disappearing. I told management the records were wrong. I wasn't asking anyone to break policy. I was asking someone to look. He lowered his eyes. No one did. Ryan thanked him. Then he looked toward Victoria. Did anyone investigate his report? She hesitated. The automated audit had already concluded. So the answer is no. She remained silent. Ryan nodded. Thank you. He wasn't trying to humiliate her. He wanted everyone else to understand. The danger had never been one person's cruelty. It had been everyone's obedience. Sophia Whitmore walked onto the stage carrying a thin legal folder. As outside counsel, she began, my team has completed preliminary findings. There is no evidence of fraud by Miss Nelson. No evidence of unpaid rent. No evidence of abandonment. She closed the folder. There is substantial evidence of procedural failure. The auditorium remained completely still. Ryan looked across hundreds of employees. I want to say something that many leaders never say. He inhaled slowly. This happened because I stopped paying attention. I trusted reports more than reality. I believed dashboards told the whole story. They didn't. They never can. His admission surprised even senior executives. He could have blamed software, middle management, outside contractors. Instead, he accepted responsibility. A woman from the property management division slowly raised her hand. "Mr. Whitmore, if we question every automated decision, won't everything become slower?" Ryan smiled gently. "Yes, it will. But I'd rather explain a delay to shareholders than explain an unjust eviction to a child." No one applauded. Not yet. The words were too heavy. Ryan returned to the podium. "Effective immediately, the executive bonus program tied to recovered units is permanently eliminated." Another wave of surprise spread through the room. "Beginning today, leadership evaluations will include verified tenant satisfaction, dispute resolution, community retention, and employee intervention." He looked directly at Mason. "If someone raises a concern, their voice becomes part of the record, not an inconvenience." Finally, Ryan reached into his jacket pocket. He removed something small, a simple wooden house keychain. Claire had quietly commissioned a local craftsman to recreate Caleb's design after Ryan described it. He held it high enough for everyone to see. "This is worth less than $5, but it represents something our company forgot. A home is never just an address. It's where people build birthdays, recover from illness, raise children, mourn loved ones, dream about tomorrow." He closed his hand around the tiny wooden house. "If we can't remember that, then we have no business managing anyone's home." This time no one remained seated. The applause began slowly, not because a speech had ended, but because hundreds of employees suddenly understood that the company they had joined years earlier was finally becoming recognizable again. 2 days after the company-wide meeting, Ryan Whitmore asked Claire to arrange one appointment. Only one. Not with investors, not with the board, with Debra Nelson. Claire made the call herself. When Debra answered during her afternoon break at the bakery, she assumed it was another customer service representative. "Hello, this is Debra." "Miss Nelson, my name is Claire Donovan. I work for Mr. Ryan Whitmore." There was a brief silence. "I'm sorry. Who?" "Mr. Whitmore, the founder of Whitmore Living Communities." Debra instinctively tightened her grip on the phone. "If this is about the eviction, it is. But not in the way you're expecting." Claire spoke gently. "Mr. Whitmore would like to apologize to you in person." Debra looked through the bakery window at customers walking past with shopping bags and coffee cups. For a moment she said nothing. Finally she replied quietly, "I don't know what good an apology can do. I understand. He only asks for an opportunity to listen." Debra closed her eyes. After everything that had happened, she wasn't sure she wanted another conversation with anyone connected to the company. Still, there was something different about Claire's voice. No scripts, no legal language, just sincerity. "All right." The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon in a small community center near Lake Erie, instead of the corporate headquarters. Ryan had insisted on neutral ground. "No boardroom," he had told Claire. "I've had enough conversations where one side sat behind a larger desk." When Debra arrived, she wore the same navy cardigan she often wore to work, and carried a canvas tote bag filled with Caleb's homework and library books. Ryan stood as soon as she entered. For the first time since seeing her on television, they faced each other without cameras, without reporters, without cardboard boxes stacked around them. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ryan extended his hand. "I'm Ryan Whitmore." Debra shook it politely. "I know." He looked directly into her eyes. "I'm sorry." The words were simple. There was no prepared speech. No carefully crafted corporate statement, just 2 words. Debra nodded once. So am I. Ryan seemed surprised. You're sorry? I'm sorry your company became something you never intended. The answer caught him completely off guard. Most people would have blamed him. Instead, she separated the man from the system while still acknowledging both. He slowly sat down. So many people have apologized to me these past few days. She gave a faint smile. But you're the first one who looked like you actually lost something, too. Ryan looked toward the window, overlooking the lake. I did. I lost sight of why I built the company. A volunteer brought coffee for both of them before quietly leaving the room. For a while, neither touched the cups. Ryan finally spoke. I reopened your file. I know. Mason called. Ryan smiled. He's becoming difficult for executives. He was always difficult. Debra laughed softly. He just believes people should be heard. That's a rare quality. Ryan nodded. It shouldn't be. He reached into his briefcase and removed a folder. Inside were property documents. A deed, insurance papers, transfer forms. I'd like to give you a home. He slid the folder across the table. A 3-bedroom house. No mortgage. No rent. No conditions. You've earned peace. Debra looked at the papers but didn't open them. Instead, she quietly pushed the folder back toward him. Ryan blinked. I don't understand. She folded her hands together. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't accept it. Why? Because then this story becomes about one lucky family. She paused. I don't want to be the exception. Ryan listened without interrupting. There are mothers tonight sitting in motel rooms just like I was. They won't all meet the owner of the company. They won't all appear on television. If the only thing that changes is my address, then the real problem stays exactly where it is. The room became very quiet. Ryan looked at the untouched folder. No investor, no attorney, no politician had ever challenged him with such gentle clarity. What would you accept? Debra answered without hesitation. A fair chance. And a promise. What promise? That the next woman carrying proof of her rent won't have to beg someone to read it. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't guilt, it was admiration. After everything she had endured, she wasn't asking for compensation. She was asking for justice. Just then, the community center door opened. Caleb hurried inside after finishing school. Mom. He stopped when he noticed Ryan. Oh, Debra smiled. This is Mr. Whitmore. The man I told you about. Caleb walked forward politely. Nice to meet you, sir. You too. Ryan smiled warmly. I've heard a lot about you. Caleb looked at his mother. Can I show him? She already knew what he meant. He unzipped his backpack and carefully removed the little wooden house keychain. The blue paint had chipped a little more since the rainy morning outside apartment 3B. He placed it gently on the table. I made this. Ryan picked it up with extraordinary care. The wood felt smooth from years of being touched. Turning it over, he read the handwritten words carved into the back. Home is where we keep each other. He remained silent for several moments. I've been thinking about these words ever since I saw you on television. Caleb smiled. My teacher said homes are buildings. I think they're people. Ryan looked at Debra. You taught him that? She shook her head. No. Life did. Ryan slowly returned the keychain. I think your son just reminded me of something I forgot many years ago. As they prepared to leave, Ryan stood once more. I won't force you to accept that house, but I am going to fix what should never have happened. Debra smiled. "I believe you." Those 3 words meant more to Ryan than any business award he had ever received. Because trust once broken was never restored through money. It was rebuilt one honest action at a time. As Debra and Caleb walked toward the parking lot, Caleb slipped the little wooden house back onto his backpack. Ryan watched them disappear into the afternoon sunlight. Then he looked down at the unopened folder still resting on the table. For the first time in his career, he realized the greatest gift he could offer wasn't a free house. It was making sure no family would ever need one because of his company's mistakes again. The announcement came 3 weeks later. Every employee of Whitmore Living Communities received the same email at exactly 8:00 a.m. Its subject line contained only 4 words: a better way forward. Unlike previous corporate announcements filled with legal language and financial projections, this one began with a single sentence. Every decision affecting a family's home deserves the care of another human being. Ryan insisted on writing every word himself. The changes were immediate. Every pending eviction across every Whitmore-managed property would now require 3 separate reviews before any legal action could begin. Automated flags could identify possible problems, but no computer would ever again have the authority to make the final decision. A resident's payment history had to be verified by a real employee. Maintenance records had to be compared with occupancy reports. If even one frontline worker questioned a file, the process stopped until the concern was investigated. No exceptions. The policy spread quickly throughout the company. Some executives privately complained that the new procedures would reduce efficiency. Ryan answered every concern the same way. If slowing down prevents one innocent family from losing their home, then we're still moving too fast. And at Maple Terrace Apartments, Mason Rivera was replacing a hallway light fixture when his phone rang. He almost ignored it, assuming it was another maintenance request. Instead, Claire Donovan introduced herself. "Mr. Rivera, Mr. Whitmore would like to speak with you." A moment later, Ryan's familiar, calm voice came through the speaker. "Mason." "Yes, sir." "I've been reviewing your personnel file." Mason laughed nervously. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is." Ryan smiled. "I noticed you've spent 15 years protecting buildings. I'd like to know if you're willing to help protect the people living inside them." Mason frowned slightly. "I'm not sure I understand." "We're creating a new department. Resident Advocacy. I'd like you to lead it." For several seconds, Mason didn't answer. "Sir, I've never managed a department. I don't have a college degree. You have something harder to teach." Ryan replied, "You noticed people. That's the qualification I need." Mason looked across the courtyard where children were drawing with sidewalk chalk. He remembered every unanswered email, every ignored warning, every night he'd gone home wondering whether he should have fought harder. "I'll do everything I can." "I know you will," Ryan answered. "That's why I called." Across town, Sophia Whitmore had transformed an unused conference room into the headquarters of the company's newest program. Large whiteboards covered one wall. Colorful maps filled another. Stacks of reopened tenant files sat neatly organized on long tables. Above everything hung a simple wooden sign. Second Key Initiative. The name came from Ryan. "A first key opens a door," he had explained. "A second key opens another chance." The initiative focused on more than correcting mistakes. It aimed to prevent them. Former teachers joined review panels because they understood family dynamics. Retired social workers helped evaluate hardship cases. Housing attorneys volunteered to simplify legal notices into plain English. Customer service representatives received training in empathy before learning software updates. For the first time, humanity became part of the operating manual. One afternoon, Ryan invited Debra to visit the new office. She arrived after work, still wearing her bakery uniform. The employees recognized her immediately from the news report, yet no one treated her like a symbol. They welcomed her as a partner. Sophia greeted her with a warm handshake. "I'm glad you're here." Debra looked around the room. "So many people. They're reviewing every disputed case." Sophia smiled. "You're the reason we started asking better questions." Debra shook her head gently. "I don't want this to be about me." Ryan, who had just entered carrying coffee, overheard her. "It isn't. It's about every family whose story never reached the evening news." He handed her a cup. "We've reopened 112 cases." Debra looked surprised. "That many? And we're still finding more." She slowly walked through the room. Employees compared payment records, maintenance logs, medical hardship requests, handwritten letters from tenants. Every file represented someone's life, not simply another apartment number. Ryan stopped beside the large bulletin board. Pinned to it were thank you notes from residents whose cases had already been corrected. One elderly veteran had written, "Thank you for reading my file before reading my balance." A single mother from Indiana wrote, "Someone finally answered the phone." Debra quietly read every note, her eyes filled with emotion. "They're beautiful." Ryan nodded. "They're also reminders." Of what? That paperwork always belongs to a person. Later that afternoon, Ryan gathered the staff for a short meeting. "I have one more announcement." Everyone turned toward him. "I've asked Miss Nelson to join our resident advisory council." Debra looked genuinely startled. "Me?" Ryan smiled. "You've spent years living the experience our reports never measured. We need that perspective." She hesitated. "I've never worked in an office." "I'm not asking you to," he answered. "I'm asking you to tell us when we're forgetting people." The room grew quiet. Finally, Debra nodded. "If I accept..." "I need one promise." Ryan laughed softly. "I thought we were done with promises." "One more?" "What is it?" "I still want to keep working at the bakery." Several people looked surprised. Ryan wasn't. "I was hoping you'd say that." She smiled. "I don't ever want to forget what ordinary mornings look like." Ryan understood immediately. The bakery counter, the coffee orders, the tired workers, the elderly customers counting coins. Those ordinary moments had shaped the woman standing before them. No executive office ever should. As the meeting ended, Mason walked into the room carrying a small cardboard box. "I found this while cleaning out an old storage cabinet at Maple Terrace." Inside lay dozens of forgotten apartment keys collected over the years. Ryan picked one up thoughtfully. "So many doors." Debra gently touched the tiny wooden house hanging from Caleb's backpack, which rested beside her chair. "No," she said with a quiet smile. "So many lives." No one corrected her, because everyone in the room finally understood the difference. 1 year later, Maple Terrace apartments looked much the same from the outside. The brick buildings were still modest, children still raced bicycles through the parking lot after school, neighbors still greeted one another from balconies on warm evenings. But something invisible had changed. The leasing office door that once seemed intimidating now carried a small plaque beside the entrance. "Questions are always welcome." Inside, every resident could request a face-to-face review before any legal action was taken. Customer service representatives no longer hid behind automated replies. A handwritten board near the reception desk displayed the names of staff members on duty each day, making it clear that real people, not just computer systems, stood behind every decision. Mason Rivera often smiled whenever he walked past that sign. He now divided his time between maintenance and leading the resident advocacy department. Instead of spending most mornings repairing leaking pipes, he often sat across from worried families listening before speaking. Sometimes the problem was paperwork. Sometimes it was illness. Sometimes it was simply that someone needed another human being to say, "Let's figure this out together." He often thought about Debra during those conversations, not because he pitied her, because she had reminded him why his voice mattered. Across town, Debra's mornings still began before sunrise. She had kept her promise. She still worked at Harper's Corner Bakery 3 mornings each week. Customers noticed little had changed. She still remembered everyone's favorite pastries. Still refused tips from elderly regulars who could barely afford breakfast. Still packed leftover bread at closing time for a nearby shelter. The other 2 weekdays belonged to the second key initiative. There she reviewed tenant letters, joined advisory meetings, and helped redesign communication between residents and property managers. Whenever someone proposed language that sounded cold or overly legal, Debra asked one simple question. "Would your grandmother understand this letter?" If the answer was no, the letter was rewritten. Sophia often laughed whenever that happened. "It's becoming our unofficial policy." Ryan usually answered the same way. Good. Some of the biggest changes started with the simplest questions. Caleb had grown taller over the year. His backpack seemed smaller now. The little wooden house keychain still hung from its zipper, though the blue paint had faded almost completely from years of being touched. His science teacher had encouraged every student to create a project answering one question: what makes a community stronger? Some children built bridges. Others designed parks powered by solar panels. Caleb built another house, not a bigger one, a wiser one. His new model included apartments, playgrounds, wheelchair ramps, community gardens benches beneath shade trees, and a small office with a sign reading Resident Help Center. Above the front entrance, another tiny wooden plaque read, "Home is where we keep each other." The annual school exhibition filled the gymnasium with parents, teachers, and local community leaders. Ryan quietly entered near the back without seeking attention. He had received an invitation from Caleb several weeks earlier. "I hope you come," the handwritten note had said. "I want you to see my new house." Ryan would not have missed it for anything. When judges reached Caleb's display, one teacher asked the question every student expected. "Tell us why you built this." Caleb looked around the crowded gym. His eyes briefly found his mother standing beside Ryan near the back wall. Then he smiled. "My project isn't really about buildings." The judges leaned closer. "It's about listening." One of them looked confused. "Listening?" Caleb nodded. "A house can fall apart if nobody fixes the roof." He pointed toward the tiny office in his model. "But families can fall apart if nobody listens before making decisions." The gym became unusually quiet. He continued. "My mom told me that good people aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who stop and fix them." Ryan lowered his head for a moment. Those words reached him more deeply than Caleb could have known. When the winners were announced that afternoon, Caleb received the Community Leadership Award. It wasn't the biggest trophy. It wasn't first place in engineering. But it recognized something far more meaningful: the ability to improve lives through ideas. As Caleb walked back to his seat, holding the modest plaque, he immediately handed it to his mother. "We won." Debra smiled. "No. You earned it." He shook his head. "We earned it." Ryan quietly stepped outside the gymnasium afterward. The autumn air felt almost identical to the morning when he had first visited Maple Terrace in disguise. Claire joined him a few minutes later. "You look different." He laughed softly. "I feel different." She leaned against the brick wall. "The board approved the annual report yesterday." "And?" For the first time, it includes community trust scores alongside financial results. Ryan smiled. What did investors think? They asked why we hadn't done it years ago. He looked toward the school entrance where children poured outside laughing. It's strange. I spent years believing compassion and business pulled in opposite directions. Claire raised an eyebrow. And now I think trust is the strongest investment we ever made. Inside the gym, Debra carefully placed Caleb's award beside his model house. She noticed the little wooden keychain hanging from his backpack. The edges were worn smooth. One tiny corner had cracked. She reached out instinctively. We should probably replace this someday. Caleb gently covered it with his hand. No. Why not? It reminds me. Of what? He smiled. That home isn't something we finally found. It's something we carried with us until everyone else finally understood. Debra looked at her son with quiet pride. Some lessons could never be taught inside classrooms. They had to be lived. And this small wooden house carved by a child's hands years earlier had become more than a keepsake. It had become a promise that would continue reaching people who had never even met the family who first carried it. On a quiet Monday morning, nearly 18 months after the rainy eviction that had changed so many lives, the executive conference room at Whitmore Living Communities looked different from the one Ryan Whitmore had known for decades. The polished oak table was still there. The floor-to-ceiling windows still overlooked downtown Cleveland. The quarterly reports still waited neatly at every seat. But one small object had permanently replaced the crystal centerpiece that had once decorated the middle of the table. A tiny wooden house. Not a replica. The original. Caleb had insisted Ryan keep it. You don't need to carry it anymore, the boy had said months earlier. Now your company does. Ryan had accepted the gift with tears in his eyes. The faded blue paint remained chipped. The carved words on the back had softened with time. Home is where we keep each other. Every board meeting now began the same way. No charts appeared on the screen. No profit projections. No market analysis. Ryan would quietly pick up the little wooden house and ask one simple question. Who lives behind these numbers? The room always fell silent. Executives no longer spoke first about occupancy rates. They spoke about families who had stayed in their homes because payment plans had been adjusted, about veterans connected with support services, about elderly residents who no longer feared opening letters from management, about children who finished another school year without changing schools because their families had not been displaced. The numbers still mattered. But they finally had faces again. Across the city, Debra had just finished another morning shift at Harper's Corner Bakery when Mason called. We've got a situation. What happened? A family at Cedar Grove Apartments. They're scheduled for eviction tomorrow. Debra felt her heart tighten. What went wrong? Nothing. That's the problem. The computer flagged duplicate payments as suspicious. The file stopped automatically because of the new review process. But they're terrified. I thought maybe you'd come with me. An hour later, Debra and Caleb stood outside another modest apartment building. A young couple waited nervously beside the entrance. The father worked nights driving delivery trucks. The mother cared for twin 6-year-old daughters while attending community college. The girls clung quietly to their mother's hands. Debra recognized that look immediately, the look of people preparing for the worst. She smiled warmly. My name is Debra. I'm not here to inspect anything. I'm here to listen. Within 20 minutes, the misunderstanding became obvious. The family's bank had accidentally processed one electronic payment twice before reversing the duplicate transaction. The automated system interpreted the reversal as a missed payment. Under the old rules, no one would have noticed until deputies arrived. Under the new system, the review had stopped everything. Mason corrected the records. The case closed immediately. No moving trucks, no cardboard boxes, no frightened children standing in the rain. One of the little girls looked up at Debra. "So, we get to stay?" Debra smiled. "Yes." The child threw both arms around her mother's waist. "We're going home." Debra quietly turned away for a second, blinking back tears. This was what she had hoped for during her conversation with Ryan. Not a miracle for herself. An ordinary tomorrow for someone else. As the family walked back inside, Caleb reached into his backpack. He carefully removed another tiny wooden house. Over the past year, he had started carving them with Mason on Saturday afternoons. No two were exactly alike. He walked over to the older twin. "I made this." The little girl accepted it carefully. "For me," he nodded. "When things get scary. Remember something." She looked at him with wide eyes. "What?" He smiled. "Home is where we keep each other." She repeated the words quietly, as though committing them to memory. That evening, Ryan received a photograph on his phone. It showed two little girls standing safely inside their apartment doorway. One of them held a tiny wooden house. The message underneath came from Debra. "This is what success looks like." Ryan stared at the image for a long time. Then he quietly walked into the conference room. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows. He picked up the original wooden house and placed it gently back in the center of the table. Not as a trophy, as a responsibility. Outside families across dozens of Whitmore communities prepared dinner. Children finished homework. Neighbors borrowed sugar. Parents tucked sons and daughters into bed. Most of them would never know the story of one rainy morning in Cleveland. They would never know the names Debra Nelson or Caleb Nelson. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Because when kindness truly changes a system, it quietly protects people who never realize they were once in danger. The little wooden house had traveled from a school craft table to a mother's key ring, to a rain-soaked sidewalk, to the center of a corporate boardroom. Worth. And finally into the hands of another child who would grow up believing that a home should never depend on whether someone was willing to read the right piece of paper. The circle was complete. Life has a quiet way of testing what we truly believe. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage are not loud or dramatic. They happen when a tired mother wakes before dawn to keep another promise, when a child refuses to let hardship steal kindness from his heart, or when someone with power chooses to admit they were wrong instead of protecting their pride. Debra never became extraordinary because she received help. She became extraordinary because she refused to let suffering change the person she was. Ryan's greatest achievement was never building a successful company. It was finding the humility to listen before it was too late. And Caleb reminded everyone that a home is never measured by walls or deeds, but by the people who choose to protect one another when life becomes uncertain. Perhaps someone around you is carrying a burden you cannot see. A small conversation, a little patience, or the willingness to truly listen may become the turning point in their story. We rarely know how far one act of kindness will travel or how many lives it will quietly touch in the years ahead. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what part of this journey touched your heart the most. Share this story with someone who believes compassion still matters, and subscribe for more stories that remind us that even in the hardest moments, hope often begins with one person choosing not to look away.